Good afternoon, and welcome to the second install of Green Talk, which happens the first Friday of the month at noon. So this, everybody wave. Hello. Say hi to Brian Dozier, because the Twins are in first place or tied for first.
All-star second baseman Brian Dozier, tied for first place.
Tied for first place.
At this time last month, we were looking at them going, what the heck is going on? Since then, it's been an amazing turn.
And we are 9-1.
I'm 9-1. Yep. You are
3-0.
Yeah,
You're
you're
3-0.
No, you're 3-0. Yeah. We just needed investment in ticket sales.
Exactly. So thanks for joining us, or if you're watching this recorded, thanks for joining us after the fact. I'm Scott McIntyre. I'm Chief Instigator and co-owner of Infinite Green Consulting. Infinite did this last month too, Infinite Green Services. We have multiple accounts and multiple brands now, multiple lines of business.
Hey,
Welcome.
I'm John, Chief Illuminator.
I'm Jared, Workforce Management Professional.
Very much so. Gavin McKay, I am the Chief Improviser here at Infinite Green Companies.
Infinite Green Companies. I will get that down.
Yep.
Change is afoot. So I'd like to welcome Jared. He's a special guest today. He works in the workforce management arena. We work together at Best Buy, where at Enterprise Customer Care, and he is also currently working at Hennepin County, and helping them do workforce planning and optimization for the health and human services teams. Correct?
Correct.
So welcome to Jared. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about workforce management, and I know this is an interesting topic for contact center professionals, but these general practices and procedures, policies could really be applied to, what we're going to be talking about is how to manage, a workforce in general. Contact centers obviously is the direct application of it, but it could be used for supply chain, other types of back office operations, et cetera. So we're going to be talking about the topic of workforce management. And to get going, maybe we just define what workforce management is specifically to a contact center organization. So if during the terms workforce management, workforce optimization, maybe we can start there.
Should we let the pro define it?
Sure.
Wow.
I would hate to actually misrepresent.
Well, so would I.
As I do on occasion.
Let's start with the difference between WFM and WFO.
It's just fine by me. To me,
Yeah.
they're the same thing.
Okay, good.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Plus acronym. Plus
Yeah.
acronym.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, so I think workforce management is really, and workforce optimization. And it doesn't matter, again, to the contact type or to supply chain or whatever, but in the context of a contact center, whether it's face-to-face, whether it's over the phone, chat, email, whatever it may be, I look at it as being getting the right number of people in the right place, taking the right kind of calls at the right time to essentially serve the customer the best way possible and in the fastest speed possible. So, in a nutshell.
To try to, basically matching the demand. In a contact center, you have, on the fly demand, right? It can be predictable, right? It can be forecasted at a certain patterns throughout the day, but there are certain elements that make it unpredictable, right? So it's managing, a base of predictability with some of the uncertainty of someone's business, and be able to do that to the best of your ability without, have to hire another 50, 100 people, let's say, to match that demand in a sense. But in a lot of cases, especially in the retail industry, you've got such peak seasons. There's this element of 9 months out of the year it looks like this, but for 3 months, it could be plus or minus 30-40%. You have no idea. So there's the parts to it, which is kind of understanding your business and trying to predict what might happen. And there's a science to it, which is, this machine that collects all this rich data is going to show you and try to predict to the best of its ability based on, let's say, the last 5 years of history, what could happen. So I think I think a good workforce management practice within a company is the art and the science of it, right? That makes it truly effective, right? You have to be able to make decisions up and above what the data is telling you in the tool. Very
Absolutely, yeah, it's a key point that it's.
It's a farmer's almanac, basically, right?
Yeah,
I mean, if you think about the origin of what workforce management is, it's essentially scheduling. To your point, I mean, earlier, it started as predicting the amount of calls coming in for a certain subset of skills. You know, kind of the proverbial solving for the 80%, and being able to schedule against that. But to your point though, with seasonality and year on year, you start to get smarter and you can narrow that down to a certain extent for it to be 100%. It allows you to be as efficient as possible.
So is it fair to say that if Ben Franklin knew how much rain Texas was getting right now, you probably wouldn't use that analogy?
Well, that goes back to his point. There's some things you can't quite predict, but yeah, all right.
No, I think, but Jared, you had mentioned one thing too about, call center. It's very call center focused because that's probably what the majority of the centralized team that has a number of different people. Getting the right people in the right place for the right demand. I think is probably the core, right? But even you're doing some things at the county, right? From a hybrid perspective of walk-in traffic. We work with this at Geek Squad a lot too. Field force versus scheduled demand and some of those kind of things too. So it doesn't have to be necessarily just call center, but it's big groups of people that you're managing against probably a volume that individually they could never manage themselves. So I think there's a technology to it. It's got, to your point, an art and a science. The art is understanding how to manage it within budget, but still be able to predict the ebbs and flows of what the customer's demand is. Because no matter what, no matter how you schedule, no matter how you forecast, the customers will blow it up if something goes wrong or if they need something that you're not providing. And it's just that's why it's called work, right? You don't just get to sit back, kick the schedule out and go.
Right. It's also what's called a forecast. It's kind of by definition, potentially wrong. But that's part of the job as well, is to understand how to react to what's real time.
So what do you think outside of the basic financial implications? What do you think the biggest value of having a good workforce optimization or management practice is? Call it a tool and the people to manage it. What would you say the biggest value above and beyond the typical financial is for that type of capability?
The biggest value probably seems like the obvious one to me, is the customer experience. Because if you're getting the right people in the right place at the right time, potentially workforce management talks a lot about service levels and things like that, which ultimately means just answering a call within a particular amount of time, so they're not waiting in line. And that applies to walk-in, as we said too. It's really just basically serving that customer in a timely manner. That's probably the biggest. But obviously that has impacts your bottom line as well. So it kind of all comes back to finance eventually.
Well, it gives you probably, even from a personal perspective, and how the employees tie into that, right? It's accountability across the board that's even.
Right.
And it allows kind of that headroom in the system to be able to manage changes to the customer experience. If you're always trying to catch up and you're always in queue or always have calls that you can't manage to, or emails or chats or truck rolls or whatever, right? And you're always trying to catch up, it tends to let an organization not focus on the forward, and it's only focused on the here and now. And thinking about what that end state customer experience is, to your point, it starts with a really good core understanding of what your demand needs are and what your resources are, and it goes from there. So, whereas a lot of people think it's just a tool, I think it's really a customer service or customer experience.
Absolutely, an employee experience.
I was just going to add employee experience as well.
Because when you, in the situation like you're talking about, John, if you run, there's a metric that we call occupancy in workforce management. Without getting into the weeds detail of that yet, maybe we'll get into those later. It's on the board for later. So, if you're running your agents, again, in any situation, whether it's on the phone, chat, email, face to face, if you're running them at 100%, so they are taking back to back calls, and it's happening for weeks on end, you will burn those agents out. You'll eventually start to drive attrition, or at least very unhappy employees. And then the same token, if they're sitting around waiting for people, if they're waiting in an empty office all day waiting to see somebody, they'll probably get pretty bored too. So it's kind of that same.
Yeah, they want that even distribution of work, right? Just more, just an even flow of inbound work. You know, and when they start waiting longer, then, you know, the customer spends a couple of minutes, you know, bending the ear of the agent, you know, complaining about how long they took in line, so that call gets longer, and that screws up all the workforce management, you know, types of forecasts, because all of a sudden your handle times are up 20% just because people are spending some time, you know, complaining about the experience, right? So
Exactly.
I remember at US Bank, when John and I were there long time ago, this ages us, that we got to do a desk spiral in the customer service area. We had about 600 agents.
Oh yeah, if not more.
And we went down this path where we couldn't get caught up, and our attrition was more aggressive than our training and our throughput of hiring new agents.
Oh yeah,
So,
it's when they changed from free checking products to
yeah.
if you walk in the door of the branch, you're gonna have to pay us if you don't have the right account.
Oh,
So it was like this crazy customer, you know, revolt. Sorry, Steph.
So we had spent a whole year trying to get caught up. And the reason I call it desk spiral is because I'm getting an inbound call from my wife. Because
Maybe she has a question about that.
she could.
Yeah.
The reason you call it desk spiral is because you can't catch up. I mean,
Right.
that's your training throughput is 30 seats at a time. That takes 2 weeks. You lose 40 people because, you know, they can't work in this environment because of the high demand. And it took us, I think, 12 to 16 months to get caught up.
Yeah, because we couldn't hire
fast
people.
enough. And, you know, we eventually had to get temps and try to overstaff. So that for the next year after that, then we're in this 30% overstaff mode. And so that, which is not good either.
Right.
Right. So it's really important that the bigger you get, you know, the more discipline you get around it, the practice and the tools you have in place, to be able to find that art and that science balance, to be able to predict what's going to happen and level out that throughput. What, from a growing business perspective, we get this question all the time from small and growing businesses. What is the optimum size? If I'm looking at my operation of 50, 75, 100 people plus, what is the optimum size that someone should consider an investment in a formal platform or a tool that does this for them versus the complex Excel sheets, as an example?
It's a really good question. And I think it depends on the environment, it depends on the contact type and how long the contact type is and things like that. But in general, I would say that 75 to 100 is starting to kind of hit the tipping point. It actually made me think of, just in the question, made me think of economies of scale and all the things that I kind of preach about a little bit in my own organizations, wherever I'm at. Excuse me, because if you don't get a large enough size, there's only so much efficiency you can even drive. And that's probably, again, that 75 to 100 engagement kind of mix, assuming your handle times in the area 5 minutes, 7 minutes, somewhere in that general vicinity. You can almost still manage in spreadsheets and things like that, and then 75, but you're 75 to 100, but you're probably not getting all the efficiency that you really could with a tool because it'll just help you run scenarios more quickly. And then anything bigger than that, you're just exponentially. Once you get up to 2, 3, 4, 500 agents, it's almost impossible to schedule via spreadsheets and actually stay on top of it and make sure that you've got. There's inevitably changes, right? Inevitably schedule shifts and swaps and things like that. If this agent doesn't want that schedule, and it just becomes too cumbersome to manage and actually less efficient to manage, in a non-workforce management dedicated tool. So
If you're doing manual shift bidding, right? That's
Oh, yeah. Yeah, really.
Right. I haven't. Yeah. Those are some of the terrible nightmares I see.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, that's all right. That's all right. Just hit a trigger.
Yeah, all right.
So,
that's exactly.
so you mentioned kind of the hard to report or hard to manage out of that. So talk a little bit about the analytics and the reporting. So you've got a workforce management application that you leverage today, right? You did when we were at our old world. But what was the benefit of, was it the tool that really got you to the analytics? Was it your the art and the science piece that Scott talked about, or was it the spread back into the spreadsheet so that you could manage and manipulate to tell the right story? Kind of walk through the reporting
Sure.
that you would actually, how you would tell leadership or your needs for investment, those kind of things going forward. That
Well,
makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does. So you can feel free to redirect me if I start to
No, I
go
just-
off,
I just-
not answer your question.
Ask you a roundabout question. So.
Yeah. So when I think of that tool particularly, what it allowed me to do, for one thing, typical ACD kind of data, or the data you get off a phone switch. And I think very specifically about interval level data. So if you're thinking, every 30 minutes or every 15 minutes, standard is probably about 30 minutes in most contact centers. Getting that data into a format where I can look at, say, a 12-week average or a 6-week average or whatever the case may be to give me, well, my Monday morning is busy and it's busier than my Tuesday morning. Those types of kind of generalities. Just to get at that data is much quicker in a system that actually just pulls it in kind of on its own, because it's designed in a way that you can just essentially say, I want my 6-week average and that runs my analytics. So instead of getting to the point, basically instead of spending all your time manipulating the data in, say, Excel or something, and trying to figure out, well, if I were to run 25 agents on the first of the month on, or whatever your scenario might be, instead of spending all your time like trying to make the data look that way, what I was able to do with with tools that we had in our own world is essentially get to the point of, well, it's got all the data included, so I don't have to spend any time gathering. I can get right to what would happen if I would, instead of having 5 days a week, 8-hour shifts, if I would suddenly go to 410s for everybody. How efficient can I be? And I can run different scenarios more quickly to get to a better solution more quickly.
Yeah.
And then take it after that analytics piece, then take it and frame it up to leadership. And usually it was set up in a way, again, that kind of your bars, charts, graphs, all the stuff that makes it very easy to speak to somebody who may not know all the ins and outs and the details, or may not be able to look at a spreadsheet of 5,000 numbers and say, well, that one looks weird.
So
it
creates context, right?
That's exactly
for, call it the finance teams, call it your executive leadership that may or may not know that anything outside that it's a 7-minute call or a 15-minute email with a 24-hour turn time, those kind of things, right? There's a lot of just basic numbers within the call center. There's a lot of metrics. And yet it consolidates it into your biggest expense in a call center, which is your people. Right. And so here's how I can look at different scenarios, and here's how I can tell the story and educate the internal teams around that so that we make better decisions. Right.
Absolutely.
I think that's a really good point about if anyone's looking for tools like that, right? What the extended value of analytics and or reporting packages within WFO or WFM. We're gonna figure that. We'll figure that one out.
No, we won't.
Just WF.
WF, WTF.
No.
But having a good understanding of, it works on the same basic premise as most of the tools, right? From scheduling, forecasting, and then demand planning, et cetera. But the extended values of things like call recording or the analytics and those kind of things are definitely beneficial in telling that story.
Absolutely. Well, and the call recording piece is actually interesting because typically from a very strict workforce management discipline, I wouldn't really think too much or care too much about the call recording because it's more of a quality thing. It's their problem. But in reality, it helps to tell what is driving calls. When you compare it with things like text analytics, or I should say not compare but pair.
Yeah.
With text analytics, voice analytics, those types of things. It really helps you understand what's driving calls and helps you to get tighter on that forecasting piece as well. So,
well, it gives it reality too, right? So
right.
You record a call. It was one of the things that I did when I was at Best Buy was people had a hard time understanding what the experience actually looked like or sounded like.
Right.
And it's great when you're able to record onto an MP3 or even onto a hard medium, which was when we were back in the day, but give it with the real customer voice, with the real agent voice, going through navigating the systems and those kind of things that it just makes it more personal. It's more of an experience and an employee experience and a customer experience. And a lot of times what happened when I would record calls and drop them into the mailboxes of some of the executives, they would come back and say, oh my gosh, we've got to spend more money on more people because it's too hard for customers to get what they need. And I said, okay, here's the expense request, right, to go and do that. Or if you want to fix the system, or if you want to invest in workforce management so we can optimize what we have and do things a little bit differently, let's go do that. And so it puts the face to kind of the numbers, if you will, and back to
Absolutely.
Getting the right investment level and the right representation of what the value of a product or a tool like a workforce optimization or workforce management tool really can do. And more as a platform, right? More as a platform that you can leverage versus just a simple, one and done type of a system that looks at your forecast and spits out a schedule.
So just as a reminder, you can ask questions. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can put a question for Jared or the team in the YouTube feed, or you can Twitter us at infinite_green on Twitter. So if you have any questions, please feel free to send us a message, and hopefully we can answer it. So what, this is, as we do our business services engagements, we often see, clients ask us questions about, how am I doing overall with my workforce management platform? What are some of the common pitfalls that you see in companies, and talking with people from other companies about this topic, that you see in, maybe we start with, because I think there's just kind of two different pitfalls. One at the enterprise level, just kind of managing masses, let's say 500 above types of enterprise environments. And then there's small, medium-sized business. Maybe we start with the small, medium-sized. What are some of the common pitfalls we see around workforce management in general that we can help others maybe avoid or address in their companies?
Believe it or not, the first one that came to mind applies to everybody. It's actually learn to use the system that you have. I know that sounds kind of basic.
Yeah. The bell ring.
Yeah, I don't know if the bell ring means good or bad, because that might have been. But
that was your captain obvious statement, but it needed to be said.
But no, I mean, there's a lot of, and to be really, just to be really frank, a lot of the workforce management optimization tools that I see out there, the companies that provide these tools, don't necessarily teach anybody how to use the tools. So the one that we used at Best Buy is actually one that I think of in particular. Yeah, it was like everything that we learned, we basically figured out on our own, which you're probably not optimizing the tool if that's the case, right? So that's the number one, is learn how to use your tool and then learn how to use it in your environment, because it might, every implementation might be a little different depending on how large your environment is.
Yeah. The way I like to define it for companies is, you have a workforce scheduling tool versus a workforce optimization tool. So a lot of times when we come into a company and do an analysis, is show me how you're flexing your staff to the demand. And instead what we get back is, well, this is how we schedule, right? But it's really what you need. I mean, the tool, what you're paying for is really the tool to tell you how to staff versus you trying to tell the tool what to staff to. So a lot of times I've even seen companies that, well, even though they have a workforce optimization tool that they spend a lot of money for, they'll still schedule in Excel and then move those schedules off into the tool. So that's a very common one. And so that change management around how you get from, hey, we've invested in this software that enable you to match staff to demand, to call volume demand or contact volume demand. That change management is really important. That training that you mentioned, right? Because they're a complex tool set. It's not in the processes, the policies that you need to set up. It's not just a plug and play type of software.
Right. And to that point, it can even drive some of your processes sometimes.
Right.
To understand like what is available in the tool, and maybe I should tweak our time off policies or how we're addressing that as a workforce management team. So it's not like you're going to say something. So
no, I couldn't agree more. I mean, for me, I'm big on sequence, so it's all about sequence. Whether you're a small or medium business, whether you're an enterprise, there's an experience, customer and employee, that the tool design and tool selection should be anchored in. Number one. Number two is the implementation of the tool, how it's trained out, how it's initially utilized. The third is how it is utilized, and that there's your sequence of events. We just got out of an engagement with a healthcare company that fell out of each phase of sequence to the point now where they're still utilizing a 10-year-old spreadsheet for a huge contact center. So they've got a tool, they're getting another tool, but chances are they're still going to be utilizing the spreadsheet because they still haven't solved that first component as that experiential component, right? So that's the pitfall right there. It's not the tool, it's not necessarily the process, it's why do we have it and what is it designed around?
And I think in this case, for this type of tool, it's not like implementing a CRM tool or another piece of technology where it's kind of a one and done. You implement it, you design the processes and requirements, you implement the tool, and you're off and running. To me, workforce management and workforce optimization is probably about a 6 to 12 month process to get good at. Right? You spend about 3 months understanding how to configure the tool, you implement the tool, you got another 3 months of kind of burning it in and getting people used to it, and then another 6 months of tweaking and tuning schedules to the point where, now my workforce management is truly matching, and my tool set and my people are actually matching demand. And that's, you should be considering when you're doing a project, this nature. It's not a great, you're up and running, everything's fine. It takes time to burn it in and to get the policies and the procedures tuned.
Well, there's so much fear of the unknown when you're talking in that scenario, right? You go from nothing to structure, right? In any situation, in most situations within contact centers that we've been involved with, right? You're imposing a structure that's going to be, harder for me to manage to. And actually what happens through that process is, at least in, I would say, every situation that I've been involved with where we haven't had it and we've gone to a formal workforce management structure, is that everyone starts to feel like their value is on an even playing field, right? Because everyone is, has the same opportunities to succeed and to fail under their own guise, right? They have to manage their own piece, and that's probably something that you've seen as well, right? Is
Absolutely.
It's tough because the change management component, Scott, to your point, is difficult. From an IT perspective, it's probably pretty easy because it's just another application. But when you start talking about the human element of it, it's actually a relief once it gets going, but that doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
Yeah, you have to do the change management curve before that starts to.
People
are fearful of it. I mean, that's, I've seen that in multiple installations where people are just scared to, is this system going to take over our lives, or how is this going to work? So once they kind of get over that and start to embrace it and understand, like what you're saying, is everybody's on an even playing field.
Yeah, I mean,
it benefits Sergeant. It benefits them as an employee in the long run. I know my schedule's predictable. Right. I can use online tools to ship in to somebody else or change shifts with somebody else without having to do it manually, or put up a post-it on the bulletin board or something in the lunchroom. So I think it really does benefit the employee from I can see my schedule at home. I can go see it on my phone. Right, there's a ton of tools now that enable these systems to push to an employee what and where and how they need to show up for work.
Yeah, think how beneficial just smartphones are now, just in managing those types of situations.
Yeah, I remember I used to print off TCS. So TCS it's now Aspect, very old workforce management application. So I'm aging myself, but you used to have to print them off, so it would do the work, but everything was printed. So you literally, for 400 or 500 agents, print out schedule. You use a whole ream of paper, and you print it out, and then it would be 2 weeks worth of schedules, and inevitably something would change, right? So you get to printing the whole stack. You used to kill a tree, and then you go, oh crap, I forgot to do X, Y, Z, or it didn't get updated. You print the whole thing again, right? But nowadays it's all live and real time, and everybody has access to the data. So changing things on the fly becomes a lot easier with the modern tool set.
Yeah, you and I spent some time overseas, and you spent a lot more, obviously managing a lot more, but do you see is the adoption from an agent perspective or a company perspective any different across the pond, UK, Europe?
No, it's not. I mean, again, it goes back to how the thing's designed, to be honest. I mean, the adoption, there's still change management.
Yep.
I think you're going to get certain levels of hesitancy in any different culture. Even in North America, we've got different levels of adoption.
Labor laws, right?
Right. Exactly. Based on that. But I mean, as far as our European partners go, I mean, adoption is what it is. If it's a solid product and it's implemented correctly, and it's anchored in that experiential component, I think it is what it is. And we saw a lot of adoption in the tools that we implemented initially, whether it was field management scheduling, kind of the store customer service facing scheduling, contact center, whatever it was. We had a common platform that we utilized, and it worked well. And it was a change for our partner when we brought it over, but it certainly was embraced because it made their business more efficient.
Yeah, it's probably more of because the situation that I'm referring to was more of a joint venture, right? So it was,
which can be tough.
You bring a practice, you bring a tool from the other side, you bring a better practice from the other side, and how you blend all that stuff together could have made it much more contentious, right? But to your point, right, it's the change management and the setting the right expectations up front was a really important part of the success of it, and not expecting it to happen overnight and to have some critical communications along the way that allow people to get their kind of fears out there or their thoughts on how to do it better, which I think is a really important part of the, you're imposing structure to some degree as a point of view, but really what it should do is open up the dialogue and make a much more clear opportunity to define what experience you really want and to get people's, input as to, what their value is to the bigger picture.
And then make sure you spin it the right way for all the joint venture stakeholders.
Exactly. For the finance and accounting teams, right? Oh, that never happened.
But that's a good point. You stay fact based on the financials, and it's going to be forward.
Yeah, that's true.
That's true.
So what do you think about letting, on this topic of letting the tool do the work versus trying to feed it trying to kind of feed it what you think the configuration should be, or checking it out. How much, Jared, from your experience, how much do you have to kind of manually adjust what it's doing versus, letting it completely do it, so giving it parameters and letting it completely do what it's been designed to do. Because I know it's easier said than done. It's like, well, you just plug in, your ops restrictions and hours and skills, and you let it do it, and whatever comes out, we're gonna abide by. Right? Which is, I've never seen that happen that way to that extent. But
it happens that way.
How do you, what do you think about when you're trying to run scenarios or kind of fit a model that someone, maybe an operations leader, has in their head?
So every tool is a little bit different that way. So sometimes there's a little bit of an art and science to using the tools too. The first spot that I think is actually kind of going back to the pitfalls. The other big pitfall that I've seen in all organizations, any size, doesn't matter, is not spending enough time, effort, resource, whatever the case may be, on the forecasting part. Because if the forecast is bad, the rest of it kind of falls apart. If you're measuring to a bad forecast, or if you're trying to constantly react to a bad forecast, then you're putting yourself in a bad spot for success. You're basically setting yourself up for failure.
Real quick, that's a great point, because I know when we go into organizations, some companies use a forecast to tell a different story.
Oh yeah.
Right? So they'll manipulate a forecast to meet somebody else's goal. Right? And so they'll adjust it up or down based on what story that leader's trying to tell to the company, which isn't the real forecast that you need to manage to, because it's, so
when
I've seen that dynamic too.
Yeah. And on the risk of getting a little snarky, but when I used to manage a team of forecasters, I would basically tell them, if you take what marketing says, divide by 4, and then start from there. Because it was always a little overly optimistic. It's a good way of
high response rate.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's there's part of the risk in that of either swaying your forecast to whatever the story is you're trying to tell, and then without getting into a huge amount of detail on that too, there's reasons you might have different types of forecasts. Like I used to have a budget forecast versus what I consider an operational forecast. They were very, very different, because I was looking at, as an example with budget, I was always looking at handled calls, because that's ultimately what I paid for in the model when I was running at that time. where I need to work on offered calls. And for anybody who may not know the difference to that, that's just basically your handled plus your banded equals your offered. But that's your true demand, is your offered call. So you need to actually build a forecast based on demand. That's kind of one piece of it. The other piece, getting into the tool of it, not letting the tool do its thing. There are certain, it depends on kind of the program, or I should say it depends on ultimately what your business is and the industry that you're in. But what I found in retail is there were certain times of year that the tool just couldn't catch up fast enough, just the algorithms that weren't designed in a way that would actually keep up with the dramatic seasonality we would see at holiday. We figured out eventually a way to kind of basically to set the tool up that it would start to, so some of it comes into the art of setting things up. For the most part though, if we just left it well enough alone and let it do its thing, because we would always come in, well, I've been here for 10 years, I know this, I know that, whatever. Most of the time, the tool did at least as good of a job, if not better job than what we were doing. And especially at the interval level. So at the, if you look at the weekly, monthly, we might be able to get fairly close, but the interval level, the tool will beat us 100% of the time.
Yeah, it's kind of like self-driving cars, right?
Yeah.
They probably do a better job than you can because they know more of the road and they have more inputs and they can make calculations much better than humans can. But at the same time, things that they don't about the marketing plan, and all the other kind of the art of it, right? All the other kind of inputs that it can't predict because something is new. So let's say it's a new, you put a number in an insert, a phone number to call in an insert one year where you didn't have it the prior 5. Right. So you really don't know what kind of volume that could drive. It's going to be higher, but the tool doesn't know that.
Right. So you have to basically put some sort of factor. And most of the tools have like a a day of week factor or some sort of some sort of seasonality factor that you can adjust to basically make up for situations.
So what do you think? Is it 75% let the tool do, 25% manage the custom, or
it's probably closer to 80-20 or even 90-10. Let the tool do.
That's pretty good.
So yeah, I mean most of the tools out there, especially with the algorithms they have now, are actually really, really good. A lot better than the old TCS days and the not to disparage that tool anyway either, because it was great.
It was a long time ago.
That was a long time ago, right?
Overlaying C plugin in Excel.
Yeah.
Which is all. I mean, they only use the same types of calcs. They all work generally the same way. Actually, the early C calc is probably pretty much used pretty holistically within these tools. They just have better interfaces and better analytics wrapped around it.
Right. Well, and a lot of it is finding the right methodology for forecasting. A lot of them are different methodologies for forecasting within like a point-to-point forecast or a seasonal forecast or various. A lot of it's just finding the right methodology to forecast and approaching it in the tool the right way. So if you, and sometimes that takes trial and error. Sometimes, if you have somebody that's done it enough, you can kind of lean on their expertise and their trial and error over the years. So a lot of it's just finding that right balance and knowing your business.
So is there any one specific tool out there that operates at much more of a user-friendly level than just a typical, like, could you bring in somebody that knows a little bit about workforce management and get them up to speed really quickly, or what's the best user experience app that you've seen out there so far?
That's a tough question because they're all actually pretty neck and neck.
Pretty similar.
Yeah.
So what makes them different? Then maybe that's a better way to say it.
So a lot of it is the way they approach, or maybe what the input has to be. So there's a couple of tools out there that you almost need the other tools to spit out a number for you, so you can input that number into its forecasting. It's called schedule efficiency is the number that a lot of tools come up with. So there's
like a pre-worksheet, like a worksheet that you
like
get inputs on before you get it into the actual model.
Right. Yeah.
That's
You
interesting.
almost have to, because it kind of expects you to know this schedule and efficiency number, and most of us would not ever be.
And the language and terms are based on the business that you're managing.
Completely. But especially in the last probably 5 or 6 years, especially the 3 big tools, they're all really like neck and neck.
Yeah.
Two of them I personally like better. Right. 2 of them I like better than the third, but that's just my personal. But yeah, I mean, they're ultimately, from a user experience, they're all pretty good. They can get pretty complex or they can be relatively simple. Just depends how you approach it.
Yeah.
And for a larger company that's got pretty good economies of scale, the complexity sometimes isn't really a hindrance. So as long as you've got the economies of scale, which I could go off on a tangent for hours about that. So
how do you think the multi-channel or omni-channel, we have all these channels coming up. Web chat is being used more often now. Virtual hold as an option, which I can see wreak havoc as it pushes the demand out, right, in a system.
totally throws
Or
your
email service levels. I think email's pretty much going away or is going away. In most companies, it's just a very ineffective channel.
Right.
But let's focus on the channels that I think customers see a lot of value in, which is web chat and let's say virtual hold or virtual callback. For those who don't know what that is, it's hold my place in line. So you call in, there's a 2-minute queue. It says we'll call you back when we're available, and then it hangs up. Right, to the workforce optimization system, that was a call that never happened, in a sense,
Right.
because it never hit a skill, right? But there is a demand, right, for a future piece of work that when it said it was going to come in at 11:05, right, and maybe for staffing issues or whatever the case, now it's actually going to come in at 11:36,
Right.
So how are tools and companies adjusting for that? Let's go down the virtual hold route real quick. How do tools effectively manage?
So if you go down the virtual hold
The
route,
shifting of demand.
how are people actually reacting to it? Are you going to say the same thing I'm going to say?
No,
They're not. That's the problem, right?
But you bring up a good point, though. It's a point in time unmet need right now.
Right.
Yeah.
So the tools as they are right now are not accounted for, period. So the answer to the question is no. But I think that's the challenge now for these platforms, is to start to account for the virtual hold callback capability and some sort of formula or methodology of understanding what it is and an average maybe of how long it's going to push the call out based on what the queue time was. I mean, I can see it, but I don't have the answer that we
what it does. So if enough people take you up on virtual hold, your future forecast will be nice and smooth, right? It's a great tool for the consumer because they can not have to sit on hold. It's a great tool for operation because they still make service levels. And I mean, all in all, it's a win-win. But at the end of the day, it makes your job harder because when you're trying to do a forecast, all of a sudden, instead of the spiky forecast that you saw last month, now all of a sudden it's a little smoother. So the tools are okay, great. I'm not going to need the people when the demand is truly there, maybe. And so then more people use virtual hold, and then you kind of go down this rabbit hole of having an invalid forecast.
Unless it's a retail company on the day after Thanksgiving. And then virtual hold actually buries you for the next week or so, week and a half, or at least.
Yeah.
Isn't that a day though where you take that capability and you turn it off?
Yeah, that's where we're going to turn that off right now. What do you think?
If you have a platform that allows you to do that, right?
Except marketing already advertising.
Right.
So
That's
marketing
problem.
Or if you forecast no answer for you.
and Jared already took 3/4 of the forecast off because
Right.
of marketing. So
I think,
Exactly, because I already divided by 40.
But Scott, I think that ultimately though, that's a really interesting kind of softball to those workforce management companies out there, because that's a key differentiator now. The first person to really solve that or have a good solution around that. I think,
Absolutely.
you look at all the tools that are out there, for the most part, Jared talked about this, a lot of them are pretty much the same. You know what you're going to get out of them. There's different levels of learning within each platform, but the multi-channel kind of solves, and being able to predict for virtual hold, being able to predict for agents who take 4 chats, 6 chats, 8 chats at a time, whatever that might be. Those are all kind of inputs to a different model that we're still kind of evolving to right now.
Right.
yeah, kind of like I like the spreadsheet or strat sheet up front process, right? That we were talking about. That'd be a great product to really define out, like being able to set your own parameters as a business, right? And to say, variable 1, 2, 3, 4, right, or whatever, and make it your priority. Right, if I know that marketing is really good at predicting, then I can make the priority for me to be able to manage that maybe a little differently.
Right.
Or make it part of my input, not just on a standard spreadsheet as a number, but with the day of week, factor or the flush factor, if you will. But it allows you a little bit more of that deliberate and thoughtful upfront preparation before you get into the actual scheduling. And it's kind of an interesting.
Well, there are some tools that are out there that I just was, probably about 6 or 8 months ago, was just introduced to, but have been out there forever. I just didn't realize they were there. That kind of get into that realm, but they're really designed for the large enterprises that can basically afford a $4 or $5 million spend on a tool.
Right.
Is it a third-party tool or is it so it's a third-party plugin for
Yeah,
one of the big enterprise like a Barrett or a
right.
Nice.
Yeah,
So,
it works. It plays in tandem with those, but they don't necessarily plug in. So it's kind of its own standalone thing. But it's it's kind of going in the right direction.
Well,
It's one of those like it's
Yeah, I'd love to see
actually
an-
not
I'd love to see an
scalable for
end-to-end
mid-sized
solution.
business.
Well, and the next phase, I think, of good care is proactive reach. So now you take the omni-channel approach, which is very reactive, right? Use a channel, talk with us on when you need to talk to us.
Right.
But like an Amazon that pushes contacts out based on predicting when you might call because of an issue. So I'm sorry I didn't get this shipped on time. You're a Prime customer. I am going to automatically dial you. Right, so now there's demand that you want me to push out, as well as demand that's inbound that you have to adjust for the tool. And I can't imagine any workforce management tool has something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, you could think about it as back office queue, but
Right, and some of them do have. Actually, I think they all do now have outbound campaign kind of add-ons and plugins for them, but it may not be exactly the same. It may not be able to handle something more dynamic like what you're talking
Yeah.
about. So,
it's because it's more of an on-demand thing. You're not campaigning. You're like you realize that
it's more of a real time.
11 o'clock today that a mispromise is going to take place. I have to call a customer in the next 10 minutes.
Right.
That versus loading up a campaign tool and
Right.
and dialing a bunch of numbers.
And there's a whole niche in all of that, because when you think about, when you think about all the things we've been talking about, right? So virtual hold or concurrent chats. I don't feel like anybody's really cracked that concurrency nut yet, as far as like, well, I've got one agent that can take 6 and one agent that can take 8, exactly what you're saying. So nobody's really, as workforce professionals, we can like tweak the tools and play with them to make them kind of like act like they would, by having concurrency, what we'll do is we'll just crank up the number of contacts and get coming in, but there's inherent problems with that, because if you do that, you're potentially throwing your service levels out of whack as far as the way it's measuring, just because it's measuring in a particular,
Measuring on a static standard.
Right, exactly. So there's a whole market, and exactly what you're talking about is more of the real time kind of push marketing, the concurrent chats, the virtual hold, because the same thing with virtual hold, I can go pull, depending on how it's coming into the system, I might be able to, instead of pulling a skill, pull data from a skill, I might be able to pull it from VDN or some, the API itself and get the information. But now I'm going out manually doing something, coming back and saying, well, do my arrival patterns match what that says? Maybe kind of, sort of, close enough, I'll go with it, or maybe I've got to overlay these patterns. So there's manual stuff involved in all those, so I think there's actually a market absolutely for all these kind of tools that will just take care of this stuff.
So we'll do the shameless plug now and make sure if anyone wants to hire Jared for his thoughts, please let him know through the website or through the YouTube. No, I'm just kidding. But no, you should, for companies that have access to somebody that's been in the business, you've been in this business for what, how many years? Lots? 13?
Yeah.
And if you think about the evolution.
I would say we kind of longer than that if you time
the
on
evolution
the
of
phone and all that kind of stuff.
The evolution of the capabilities over that period of time have been, how many different generations, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And to have somebody that's gone through those evolutions, but also sees like what the next thing should be, or some things that would make your life much easier and benefit the overall experience, like we talked about up front. That's the name of the game, right? So, so having access to that kind of carnal knowledge would be an asset for anyone.
And I'm happy to spout my opinion to any company.
We do know that.
I had a question on the board that written down previously. I think this is an important one that we see, maybe more at an enterprise level. But how important is the ACD component in getting to a clean forecast? I know we talked about this a couple months back because we were dealing with a customer who had a couple hundred skills, and they were integrating on top of a Cisco switch. And let's get specific here, because what I learned in the process is that an Avaya data feed versus a Cisco data feed versus a Genesis or an Aspect or name your switch can be much different and have a pretty big effect on the outcome of a forecast. So in your experience, how have you kind of dealt with the variances in using maybe a same tool versus a different switch and adjusted for that?
So the biggest thing that is actually, this is where I wish I had my team of people, my minions, to go figure this stuff out for me. But as an example, I just went from an Avaya switch, for using an Avaya switch for 10 plus years, to a Cisco switch. The biggest difference in doing that right off the bat is what you might call ACW or AHT or whatever the case may be in Avaya is a very different thing in Cisco. Or what they call abandoned calls in Avaya will measure at a specific spot if this is what an abandons. In Cisco, the same term can actually mean different things depending which report you're pulling. So the primary way I would get around any of those types of things, and it doesn't matter, to me, an ACD is an ACD is an ACD for the most part. As long as it's measuring what you need it to measure, you're good to go, and you can work with anything. Again, I have personal preferences, but that's, but as long as you understand what it's measuring, when it's measuring it, and then get that feed into your workforce management tool. So
is it a matter of defining it at the switch level first, so creating a data definition on the switch level, or do you actually manipulate it once it comes into workforce management system, or both?
At the level, depending on who I have access to in the IT world and in telephony world, most of the time what I've had to do is just learn what the ACD is already set for, and then make those adjustments in my workforce management tool, and potentially say that this handled call, or however I'm defining whatever metric, or handle time is probably a better one because that's the more squishy one that people measure at different times. So I'm defining handle time appropriately in my workforce management tool, but then also bringing it from the ACD and saying, well, I need these 3 components from the ACD, or in this particular ACD, I only need these 2 components because it measures what I need. So it's just really understanding the kind of the metadata behind it.
Yeah, and again, that gets back to the tuning step, right? So you launch it, inevitably you don't cover most of that. You don't know going in.
Right.
Yeah,
this is all things that I've
key learning.
Like, oh wow, this report looks wild. Why does it, I know that I didn't have 7 abandoned calls all last month, or 70, I think it was a term. This actually just happened to me recently. It's like, well, I know I didn't have 70 abandoned calls in January. I must have way more than that because we take,
And one of the things we saw with a Cisco Barrett installation was Cisco couldn't pass after call workstates. So it
just recently found that out myself.
Right. So if Cisco's not passing after call workstates, and one of your after call workstates is training or customer follow-up or whatever, and you're defining that up front, and it's not passing you the stat, you can't measure it. So if you're doing forecasting and staffing against after call workstates, it struggles with it, right?
Right.
Or frankly, it doesn't do it.
In large environments, that's a lot of time to account for.
It is.
Right.
It is. Well, and you can take, because I think it will pass the overall bucket as far as what your not ready time is or not available time is, but it won't separate it into the states that you really need. And yeah, to your point, in a large enterprise, that's a lot of time. That's a lot of money. So then you get into weird places in the workforce management world of like, well, I think, because I don't know for sure, but I think that 80% of my not ready time is valid, like ACW time, and the other 20 is training time. But then you're manually,
Again, you're guessing, and
so right, guessing.
you're truly not tuning. You're still swagging at what you think is going to happen. Right. It gets back to the self-driving car. You have to, you have to do that in this environment. I don't think there's any tool that you can let go and
Bulletproof. It's the third self-driving car reference today.
Sorry.
That's it. You're done.
I was waiting for that.
Give him the bell tap.
There you go.
What would Brian Dozier say?
Twins win? Or Fireball, one of the two. I know we have about 5 minutes left. There's one question. What about number of skills? So you think about an organization, a typical organization that might have 500 people on the phone, maybe multiple languages, multiple skill sets from a training tier 1, tier 2. Is there, what kind of impact does having too many skills defined in the system have on workforce management in general? Does it make the job harder, or completely, in a scale of 1 to 10, how ineffective, 10 being really ineffective? If I said I have 200 skills in my call center, 500 people, how ineffective is the tool going to be because of that kind of operational construct?
Yeah, it would basically be a 1.
Yeah.
You're getting, when you start parsing it out, so brilliance and simplicity. I mean, there is absolute brilliance and simplicity. And again, it comes back to, I can start preaching on the economies of scale. I have 3 on that yet.
Next time.
Okay, next time I get the bell, not quite. When you start parsing things out to that degree, for one thing, if you've got a 500-seat call center and you've got 200 skills in that particular example, most likely any one of those skills is not that large, not receiving that much volume. And if you were to separate, and I get the tendency to want to.
Or the other way, the majority of people all have the same skill.
Right.
Let's say 90% have,
Right. Well,
30
exactly.
skills
And if that's the case, then why can't you just have 1 skill for 90% of the people?
Yeah.
Or, And I get there's some reasons why you separate them out or things like that. And
Some people do it for reporting purposes.
Right.
Each scale's a customer, so you're handling multiple clients or multiple,
Right.
They don't necessarily know how to measure from the toll-free down into the system. So that demand is the client reporting is driven off of a skill instead of a CRM platform, as an example, or a transactional platform.
Which, from a workforce standpoint, the CRM tool is a much better choice. Because even if I take it away from workforce management for a second, the customer experience gets tricky if you end up with 200 skills as an example again. Because I've used this in a few scenarios, but so how do I know that I'm trying to route you a call, Scott, and it's coming in on one particular skill? How do I guarantee that it's even going to get to that skill? Right. Because there's so much complexity through an IVR or through whatever the phone menu might look like. That how do I guarantee that a customer is actually going to get to the particular agent that I want? When you get that complex, there is no guarantee.
And whoever designed that call flow, if they get hit by a bus, who's going to unravel that?
Well, there's that too, yes. And it's not going to be me, right?
Yeah, there's no. I don't, to be honest, most customers we walk into use it for a level of reporting that should be taken care of on the CRM side or dispositioning side, transactional system, a toll-free report of the originating number, et cetera, et cetera. And they use skills as a convenient way to measure, but that wreaks havoc on workforce management, like you said. So make that a lesson. Skills should be associated with skills, language skills, or serviceable skills, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, et cetera, and not for client reporting purposes or the company wants to know how many calls they're getting on. If it's campaign, it should be down at the campaign level. Those kinds of things.
Well, and tactically, what that drives is when you have that many skills, you're driving a potential margin of error for reporting and everything else. Just from a workforce standpoint, if I have to pull 250 skills to get 1 call type, or what I consider 1 call type or 1 skill, like practical skill, the margin of error for missing a skill in that 250, that list of 250, or some catastrophic event is actually a lot higher. That essentially just would not be as efficient as you could have been had you had 1 skill, or 2 or 5 or.
Sweet. All right, so we wasted another hour of your time on Green Talk. I want to thank Jared for coming over and helping us with the conversation. We hope you got something out of this from a workforce management optimization, whatever acronym you want to put at the end of WF. That was Green Talk. So again, every month at the end of the month, the last Friday of the month at noon, we have a Green Talk. We'll have one next month as well. We don't know what the topic is yet, so if you want us to go through a specific topic, just send us an email through our website. Or tweet us. Last words, anyone?
Last words.
Go Twins.
Last words, go Twins. Exactly.
Twins win.
Thanks all.
Thank you.